Hello, welcome. I am Hollis Taylor, and this is my page, Divine Androgyne. And I'm here because I have um, tried to make a video a couple times and I keep over editing it. Um, and so I think instead of doing that, I'm just going to go live and do it. And I'm also going to address why I'm so anxious and nervous about what I may or may not say. Okay. So, first of all, I'm 48 years old and I identify as non binary and have for at least 10 years, if not like more like 12. But I wasn't always outspoken about it. And then, I came to this conclusion maybe even before that, but I didn't really have a good word for it. It wasn't available. But I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a trans woman, and she said to me, you don't have to have surgery to be transgender. And I was like, right. And so then she asked me, are you more comfortable as a man? And I said to her, I don't know that that's true. And she said, well, maybe you're something in between. And she was like, only you can answer that, right? And at the time, I didn't really know. And there wasn't really a word for it or anything like that. Okay. And so, anyway, I came to the conclusion in some of my spiritual witchy practices that, and I also was doing yoga and Reiki on myself, and I was doing some what would be called witchy practices. I don't really see them that way. I just see them as magic. And so anyway, so I began doing those kinds of practices on a pretty regular basis. And I came to the conclusion that I was likely both. Yes. I was also doing drag at the time, so just include that in there. And if I didn't talk, I was really passable as Izzy the he, right? And I eventually became sort of like, I'm not sure just him is appropriate, and then I feel like you're ignoring something else. And anyway, I'd have a variety of experiences about that. And so time would pass, and I pretty much would come up with that I am both. Okay. And in that, I also got that it was a spiritual calling, that it was a calling for me to be a man in a woman's body. And I just sort of thought it was kind of sacred. Now, this is probably over 10 years ago. Okay. And so this is 2024. So this is probably like 2014 ish. At the time, I also relocated to Colorado and I began to travel all over the country in an RV. And so during that time, I started to write out my experiences with gender and my thoughts about it in regards to how it affects me and stuff like that, and including my story and processing my traumatic childhood. And so, because I do believe the two are interrelated, I also think that transgender people, even if they mostly had a pretty healthy childhood, are traumatized just by being gender variant in a very binary world, because we initially think that there's something wrong with us. So anyway, I came to the conclusion that it was a spiritual thing, and I wrote a book. And the name of that book is Divine Androgyne. Okay. Divine androgyne is a term that is from the alchemical tradition. And alchemy is essentially the practice of turning lead into gold. What do I mean by when I say that? I mean by taking your shadow work and making it into something worth having. And so I really felt called or connected to that title, Divine Androgyne. And I was also practicing alchemy, magic at the time. Plus, I was doing yoga, which is also alchemy at its basis. And over time, I wrote this book over a couple of years, and I was traveling, and then I had to get it edited, and that took forever. And so anyway, I wrote this book, and by the time I published it, a lot of things in the languaging had changed. And I guess I was excited to publish a book. And so I published it without going back and changing those things. I did go back and change some things as a result of that. But I didn't change enough. Okay. And I realize that now. But at the same time, if I took the book back and rearranged the languaging again, maybe by the time I get that done, which is humanly possible without AI, it would probably change again. I don't know. Okay. So this video, I'm going to answer some questions from someone who emailed me, who read my book, who had some questions about divine androgyny. Okay. So, divine androgyny is a term, like I said, it's from an alchemical background. Okay. So, from alchemy, turning lead into gold. And what does that mean? Okay. Well, that means making your shadow into the light. And at the time, my shadow was social anxiety. I had major social anxiety. And so to turn it into gold, I decided that I was non-binary because I felt that I was being put into a hole based on what genitalia was on my body. So I just simply shifted, okay? And I came to understand that it was sacred to be transgender. And as I published this book, I called it Divine Androgyne, as a recognition of my experience with gender and the divinity of that. Okay? And my friend who asked some questions, their name is Eddie Bliss. His name is Eddie Bliss. And Eddie Bliss has his own channel. And it's, I had it here a second ago. And it's Wolf's Bane Witch. So I'll put it down in the description so you can check out his channel. And he asked some questions like, what is the divine androgyne as a metaphysical concept? Can it be universally applied? And so the very answer quickly is yeah, because transgender people, well, we come in all shapes and sizes, right? We come in a variety of changes and viewpoints and perspectives and even experiences. And clearly, some people go directly from one gender side to the other gender side, and then they sometimes turn around and end up in the middle or go back to the original. Or, well, there's lots of different experiences out there. There's even some people that don't quite understand gender or push against gender, or, well, there's a variety. And I also know that words change in their meaning. Now, divine androgyne used to mean the balance of masculine and feminine within one person. And it was seen as a sort of like shamanhood or magical path, okay? A way in which we would walk the path to be a sacred gender variant being, okay? And that would be because the person had both masculine and feminine energies within them, speaking on more of a magical sense. And then later in time, we began to have the gender revolution, right? And that's what we're in now. And people are, well, shoot, the perspectives and ideas around gender change every year or two, frankly. And we're constantly sort of reassessing the rules and trying to turn the wheel or shift the sails in regards to that revolution. And well, that's what a revolution is. So as we do that, we experience gender in a variety of ways. And some of us might experience it more deeply. Some of us might experience it more like transgender, where we decide to transition physically, and it's not always in relation to like a social thing or whatever. Sometimes it's more about how we see ourselves or feel about ourselves. And there's a lot of really deep exploration of gender out there. There's so many deep, different ways of seeing it really deeply. And for me, it's spiritual. Okay. So I was clearly born in what is called a female body at birth. And I was raised female. Okay. And I wasn't really given any choice. It was, 1975. Okay. I'm sure there were gender variant or transgender people out in public, and they were still seen as freaks. Okay. Like, I guess most of the time they stayed hidden. And then eventually that changed over time. And I would say for me, as my son grew into an adult and I identified less with being a mother and started to explore in my Saturn returns, who am I really? That was when I discovered that there was more beneath me than just the mother, the wife, the female, the woman that had been. And I explored that. I explored it through drag and through sexual experiences and all sorts of other things. And eventually I concluded that, I might be transgender or gender variant, or I'm not sure. And so I started to explore all those. In that, I learned that it was spiritual in the crossing over. So in the experience of being assigned female at birth and then realizing I might be something else and exploring the other side, regardless of where I land, still makes me a divine androgyne. Why? Because it's not about where you landed, it's about the journey. Life is always about the journey. So when, in my opinion, and you don't have to take this on, but maybe it resonates with you, maybe it doesn't. And no one has to take on the term divine androgyne. It doesn't have to apply to someone that doesn't want it to apply. But if it does apply to you, maybe you might, if you do resonate with it, then you might identify with the term. Okay. That's all it's about. So divine androgyne as a metaphysical concept today, because of the change of the term, because of the change of our experience with gender, because of the gender revolution that we're currently in, its meaning also changes. And I think what it's really saying is having the spiritual experience of being gender variant, regardless of where you land on that scale, whether you are transgender, whether you are whether I wouldn't say cisgender people unless they have completely explored and come back, maybe, okay? Then maybe, because they've explored both sides of the gender spectrum and what's in between. And so as a result, then I would say, okay, maybe that person is a divine androgyne then, especially if they would say how important it was to explore, understand, and celebrate the divine androgyny, okay? The divine sacred path of being transgender. Also, I want to say that there is a term that is often seen for transgender people doesn't exactly mean that when you get down to the term. The name of the term is two-spirit. You've probably heard it before, right? Okay. And it's usually used for indigenous LGBTQ people. In fact, it was founded in the 80s to include all queer indigenous people. Okay, that's pretty much all it is. All tribes, all queer people. Transgender, not gay people, lesbian, everybody. Okay? Because it was seen as a two spirit. In other words, they experienced both sides of the gender spectrum because they were gay, because they were lesbian, and it was seen, or transgender, it was seen as a spiritual experience, okay? And then therefore called two spirit, okay? And it was like a spiritual way of honoring a transgender person, which is awesome. Except I didn't grow up on a tribe in a tribe, and it would be awful for me to take on that spiritual term. It would be cultural appropriation, I think they call it, and I'm not interested in that. And I think indigenous people should have the term and use the term however they want, okay? And that's great. But in honoring of my white skin and my white heritage, clearly, since my skin appears that way, I want to identify with what makes sense for my ancestry, which would be alchemy, especially as nerdy as I am, and alchemy in relation to the divine androgyne and the ancient term divine androgyne. Of course, it's going to change over time, just like the meaning has changed for the word two spirit, okay? And so divine androgyne also changes. And so, as a metaphysical concept, it is the experience of both sides of the gender spectrum, whether it was your choice or not, because most transgender people wouldn't choose to transition and go through everything that they go through in order to feel comfortable in their own body. Okay, so but it is a sacred path. It is a sacred journey in itself, and you learn so much about yourself, and so many things come true and manifest and change and shift for the person that transitions. And I know this is true because I've experienced other people, I've watched other people do it, and I've also experienced my own transition. And some people like really come into themselves, and they're really like on the other end, they're like, wow, here I am. And that's what they really needed to do. And that's perfectly fine. But they've still had the journey and the experience. And that is sacred. And that's what I'm honoring with that word, divine androgyne. That's what I'm honoring. So I think that pretty much covers the first question and might cover a few others. But can it be universally applied? So I'd say, yeah. How, in your opinion, does the concept of divine androgyne help queer and trans individuals express their unique divine identity? Well, essentially, what I'm saying is that because of the experience of both sides of the gender spectrum, a person would have an experience in which that would open their perspective to a broader sense. And spiritually, like if we're just talking raw magic here, we would have to make reference to giving and receiving. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if a person was able to give and receive energy within themselves? It would almost create a level of self-healing, right? And I would say most transgender people, most gender variant people do go through a self-healing process and probably master the process in their transition, okay? And regardless of where they landed, doesn't matter. Even if they landed in the middle or went back, doesn't matter. It they have to have some self-healing and some time where they create energy in order to heal themselves. And this is divine androgyny, okay? And this is the benefit. The benefit is also having a term, just like two spirit people do, okay? They have a spiritual term that refers to them. And although some tribes may choose to use a different name, that's okay. And they may choose to change it up or make a separation between the gay and lesbian people and transgender people, and that's true amongst different tribes. And also, isn't it helpful to have a term? Isn't it nice to have a term that you can identify with, that we get, that honors our transition, that honors our journey? And whether you've just begun on that journey or you've been in it. And I think that's really powerful, to honor the transgender journey, okay? The gender variant journey, regardless of where you land. How, if at all, does the concept of divine androgyne limit our ideas of divine gender? Okay, I would say that it doesn't limit. I would say that it expands it, because it grows with the idea that gender variance is sacred. And so if the term has already changed numerous times over time, then it would continue to change with the revolution, allowing us to feel empowered to own the word, sort of like we did with queer, where we take that, and instead of, like, in the 70s, being called queer was like being called a really bad word. And no longer is it that way, because we've taken our power back. And I think that that's really what's important here, is that if someone did decide to use divine androgyny, that they would find themselves in a level of empowered being, and to know that they can go anywhere on the spectrum without cultural challenges, without cultural boundaries, and they can express in anywhere in the gender spectrum that feels good to them, knowing that they are always backed and supported by divinity. I think that's pretty powerful, frankly, having that freedom and being able to move away from social norms and instead move in to what's divine for us, or what's sacred for us, or what feels right to us. That is the power. That's where the power of gender lies. And in my book, there were times that I made reference to feminine. I tried to define feminine, masculine, and that was my mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I should have just stayed in the bigger concepts. But sometimes I feel like my bigger concepts are too big to swallow. But now I've started to realize in the last 5 years that a lot of the people that I'm talking to, which would be millennials, people with Pluto and Scorpio. I know I'm an astrologer. You may or may not be. But anyway, for that generation and a lot of other people, seem to be more open to my concepts and ideas than they were 10, 15 years ago about gender, okay? And when I used to first say that gender was much more expansive than just two genders, I really got it, even from transgender people. They were like, pick a side. In fact, I used to write a blog called Do I Have to Choose? I didn't say that because it was easy, because there were people who made it easy for me to just choose something in the middle. There was none of that. In fact, it was like, you have to choose between one side or the other. I went to a support group and they asked me why I wasn't on hormones. Okay. So, and when I was going to start, and I was like, I'm not sure I want to do that. I'm not sure if that's where I'm at. I might be somewhere in the middle, I'm not sure. And the more I would talk about it, the more I would talk about this expansive expression of gender beyond our sex parts, and more about our insides and our spiritual calling. And it would just get kind of dumped in the trash. It would get dismissed or ignored. Okay. And so I guess that's why I went to that, because I wanted to be accepted, because I wanted the queer community to love me and appreciate my message. And that was a big mistake. And that's also what took me so long to make this video, because I'm afraid of the rejection of the LGBTQ community. And that's unfortunate. Okay. And it doesn't mean that I'm fake or whatever. It just means that I have like some social anxiety when it comes to some of my gender variant, transgender, gender variant peers at times, because I sometimes feel like I'm too much, too intense, or I'm too broad, or my thoughts are different than everyone else. I feel like the weirdo. Well, in the last 5 years, I've come to the conclusion and the understanding that I was made this way. And some people are going to love it and some people are going to hate it. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And the best thing for me to do is just bring through the messages as they were meant to bring through, even if people dislike me for it. Okay? And so that's what I've had to come to the conclusion as I approach 50 years old. Maybe you can resonate with some of that. I don't know. But I don't think it limits our ideas. I think divine androgen expands our ideas. Does the concept of divine androgen rely on the binary male, female, feminine, masculine binary in order to function properly? No, as I've mentioned, not at all. It actually has more to do with the journey, the transition of in between. And doesn't rely on having to have an end. No, in fact, I think what would be beautiful is if we could somehow find a way to not label children as male, female as when they're born, and let them express however they choose to express as they grow up, and then see what happens. Maybe gender will just kind of go out. Maybe it's completely unnecessary. Sometimes I think it's a gender is a concept that we don't really need, because it just creates separation at birth. And I know in all my years of gender exploration that in the end it usually doesn't matter, that we're all just people, we're all just human beings, we're all just people, and we have to come to our own conclusion, our own space, our own way of being. And that could be different for all of us. And masculine could even be experienced differently by all of us, even spiritually. Like to say that's a masculine energy that you're feeling spiritually, or feminine energy. Those energies that you're feeling or not feeling could be a result of your experience. And so I think that divine androgen, in honoring the journey of questioning gender and exploring gender fully as we have it in our culture now, that's the magic. And I believe the term divine androgen will continue to transform, because that is the base of alchemy. That is the foundation of alchemy, is to transform and change. And so, of course, the meaning of the word will transform and change. Just like it used to mean something different to turn lead into gold, and how that meaning has changed over time, so will a change of divine androgen. So I think we have to leave room for the word to evolve and change. Now, no one has to take on the term if they don't want to. If you like that word and it resonates with you, and you feel like you want to honor your sacred past with something, well, there you go. You got it. And my book's not up to date. It's got a lot of old ideas because I'm old. Take a look. I got wrinkles and stuff. Okay, give me a break. And I didn't mean to say the thing. And a lot of the things that I said, I realized were wrong, but not until I published it. What do you do then? And then somebody said to me, yeah, but Hollis, if you took that book down, you'd be erasing more GLBTQ history. And I'm not here to do that either. So we can just honor those parts as the history of the gender revolution as we all march forward together, pushing for the same thing: equality and understanding. I hope I addressed most of your concerns, thoughts, or ideas. If I didn't, you're welcome to make a video and send it over to me, and I'll do my best to answer it. Anyway, this is Divine Androgen, or Hollis Taylor. Anyone can be a divine androgen, just like any indigenous person can be a two-spirit person. I like the term. And for me, it is my spiritual path. So thank you.